Hey everybody, it's Femtrooper, and today we're going to be talking about the 20th anniversary of the Nintendo 64. Wow, so it has been 20 years since the Nintendo 64, or N64 as a lot of us called it, was released in North America. It's really hard to believe, yet not at the same time, because if I were to ask you if this was 10 years old, it is definitely not. It is way older than that. I just sometimes forget that the 90s is as long ago as it was. So I got my Nintendo 64 back in 1997 during Christmas, so at the time it had only been out just over a year, and it was an amazing Christmas. 1997 and 1998 were pretty good, because 97 is the year that I got the Nintendo 64, and then 1998 was the year that I got my Game Boy with Pokemon, so those two Christmases are pretty intense. And it marked the final sort of storageness of the Super Nintendo, because the Super Nintendo was, a huge console for me. It's my favorite. And that came out in 1991. And then all of a sudden the N64 just replaced it. And it's funny how as a kid it was instantly shelved. Like the Super Nintendo was over at that point. And not over forever, just when you're a kid and something new comes out, it's all about that. Like, the Super Nintendo meant nothing now that this came out. This was obviously better. Obviously was going to have more, better games. And then everything was going to change. The stores were going to stop selling Super Nintendo games, and they were going to stop renting Super Nintendo games. So now it was all about the N64. And I realize this is the same thing with Nintendo to Super Nintendo, but I never had a Nintendo. So Super Nintendo was my first, then N64. So that Christmas was amazing. I remember getting the N64 as my Santa present. And disclosure on that, my Santa Claus present was never wrapped. So I always would come down the stairs and it would be there. Boom. Because the whole concept was, for some reason, I guess, I don't know, my parents presents that were wrapped were under the tree and were from parents and friends and family and stuff, but the Santa Claus present never was wrapped. So it was always like I never came down the stairs and wondered. It was always just there in all its glory, and it was always left by the fireplace. So we had the tree in the living room, and then by the window, and then we had the fireplace. It was a real fireplace. And I always had a Santa Claus present there. And I think this was the first year I actually didn't believe in Santa. I knew it wasn't real, I believe. But my parents continued the Santa Claus present concept until I was 18. And Santa Claus presents were always big presents. So they were big gifts, like consoles, anything that was expensive. So, like a CD was never a Santa Claus present, or a Barbie was never a Santa Claus present, because those are like $20 things. So they had to be consoles. Like, I got my Game Boy under the tree. Or sorry, I got my Game Boy as a Santa Claus present. N64 was a Santa Claus present. I remember getting my very first cell phone as a Santa Claus present. So there were things like that they weren't like, they weren't this $20 things from Walmart. So that's, N64 was probably my most memorable Santa Claus present, I think, just because it was in such a huge box and it was so incredible. And like I said, it wasn't wrapped, so I came down the stairs, and I wasn't quite the N64 kid from YouTube, but I remember being pretty excited. There was an N64 there. Like, this was big deal. Now, one thing I have learned as an adult that I will hopefully try and instill with a future child when I have a kid is just because you don't like something anymore doesn't mean you should get rid of it. And I'm not saying to be a hoarder by any means, but when the PlayStation 2 came out, I decided I I don't want the N64 anymore. I'm going to sell it to get money for PlayStation 2, because at the time I was debating, do I continue staying with Nintendo or do I move to the PlayStation 2 and become a Sony person? Because back then when you're a kid or a teenager even, you don't have all the consoles unless you had tons of money and your parents just somehow bought you all the consoles. But even then, back in the day, there weren't all the consoles that there are now. It was kind of a Sega versus Nintendo world, and then all of a sudden Sony joined it, and it was Sony versus Nintendo. Sega was sort of not really a thing, and then Xbox kind of came along, and now it's Xbox versus Sony, and Nintendo's kind of like, hi. So it's just changed a lot. So back in the day, you either had a Sega Genesis or you had a Super Nintendo, or you were just really rich and your parents bought you both. But my parents weren't going to buy me 2 consoles, and I was just happy with the Super Nintendo. I didn't need a Sega Genesis, or actually, I didn't even want one. I could care less. But in 2003, I believe, I decided I need to get rid of the N64. It is so passe and old. I think it was 2002 or 3. I forget. But anyway, Final Fantasy X was being advertised, and I thought, that looks like the best thing I've ever seen in my life. Screw Nintendo. I don't want a GameCube. I even rented a GameCube from Blockbuster, and it was I don't know. I didn't love it, but the Sony PlayStation 2 had all the possibilities. So I sold my Nintendo 64 with all my original games, including in-box Ocarina of Time, like in-box Paper Mario. I think most of my games were in-box. I didn't ever throw them away, so it's a little bit disappointing, I'll be honest. It's a little bit very frustrating, because those games are worth a lot now, and I think I sold the whole thing for $100. All my games and the console. I had 2 controllers. Wow, that was stupid. So about 5-6 years ago, I decided I'm going to rebuy an N64. And at the time, retro gaming was sort of just getting cool. So people didn't have the same interest as it is now. I did find a in-box Nintendo 64 for, I think it was $100 or something under that. I feel like that is cheap compared to what it would be now. I don't remember how much I paid for it, but it was a good deal. So I'm happy. I kept the box and everything. So it made me feel like I kind of bought back what I sold 15 years ago. Why I think that's funny is I never wanted to sell the Super Nintendo. So it goes to show what I favored, because there was something so special to me about that console that I never sold it. I don't know, because I could have totally sold that and the N64, got more money, but I never did. I always kept the Super Nintendo. It was really special to me, and it still remains my favorite console, so there's that. So, I don't have all my original Nintendo 64 games, nor do I care to own some of the ones I used to own, but I will talk about some N64 games that I do have now. I'm not going to show everything, but games that meant a lot and are incredibly nostalgic for me. Because the N64, as much as I love the Super Nintendo and praise it for everything, the N64 is probably actually a bigger part of my childhood than the Super Nintendo, because I was more of that kid age. I was more of that, like, Stranger Things Goonies age versus... I was pretty little when I played the Super Nintendo, so I feel like the Super Nintendo shaped me, but the N64 was like pretty much childhood. So let's talk about this game right here, and that's Diddy Kong Racing. The first game, I remember my dad hooked it up. I couldn't wait. Like, after all the presents and everything was opened, it was like, okay, we have to set up the N64. Oh my god. Because it was like 3D graphics. Like, this was a huge deal. Going from the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo was great because the graphics look so much better. But going from the Super Nintendo to the N64 was a change entirely. It wasn't just, they look better, they're crisper, there's more details, there's more colors, blah, blah, blah. It was like an actual different style of graphics. So it was a really big deal. And now I look at the N64 and it looks so terrible sometimes. And I think, wow. But at the same time, some games still look pretty good. And Diddy Kong Racing is really good. I loved this game, and I'm so glad that we bought it back. Like, I have it again now, because this is just a solid racing game. I have to say, there are a few things on here that are pretty painful to play now that for some reason were excellent, so long ago. Which is funny, because it's just funny when you're a kid how you can do some things like the split screen playing GoldenEye or something, and it just looks terrible, and you're playing it on a little screen anyway, and yet you just don't seem to care. But we didn't know any better. I didn't have, big widescreen TVs and PlayStation 4s. Like, that's not a thing. So this is what the latest and greatest video game console was, and it was damn awesome. Next game that I want to talk about, I actually don't remember if I owned this originally, if it was more just a rental. Wow, $7.99. Was Pokemon Snap. I loved Pokemon, and this game was really exciting because it was using Pokemon, but in a different way, because you got to go around and take pictures of them, and it sounds pretty lame, and sometimes it is, but it was a fun game, and I remember really liking it. Here's a game I never owned because, of course, my mom sometimes, sorry mom, was a little bit of a 90s cliche and thought this was violent and that I could not own it. So I remember playing it at friends' houses and stuff. But that's GoldenEye 007. This was also, check out that $14.99 price tag. This would probably be like $40 or $50 now if you found it at a pawn shop. So yay, I'm glad I bought it when I did, when I was trying to collect stuff again. But yeah, GoldenEye 007, it's so nostalgic for me, playing it at my friend's house, and I remember it freaking me out, sort of, in a fun way, where I would constantly go hide, and there'd be those doors that went, and then I'd go in them and like wait and wait, or then there was like the horribleness of looking at somebody else's screen and seeing where they were and coming after them, or playing just with hands. That was always fun, or like knives or whatever. I don't know. This was it's just a funny game, and it's funny how, yeah, it's violent because it's shooting, but I can barely tell what's going on. It's so damn like cubey and pixelated, so it's like, I don't know. I don't think this was really as violent as people thought it was. Here's a game that I loved like a lot. Even though it's actually not very long, and as I recently played it a couple years ago, and that's Yoshi's Story. And the reason I liked this so much was more for the animation and the fact that I was obsessed with Yoshi. I used to draw it all the time, at recess, like pretend, the Yoshis were real and stuff. I don't know, so nerdy, but I don't know, I had a real gravitation to this whole world that was just Yoshi. It was without everybody else from the Mushroom Kingdom, and it was just about Yoshi, and Yoshi's Story, and I thought it was really interesting. So I don't know what that is, but I'm glad I have it again, because it is a fun game, but I don't know, I fell in love with it. Now we're going to talk about two games that are absolutely phenomenal, and they're these games right here, Donkey Kong 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. Wow. These, aside from Super Mario 64, which we'll get to, were the new generation of platforming. We were so used to the side-scrolling stuff, and then all of a sudden they kind of abandoned that, and started doing these kind of platformers. And as much as Super Mario 64 is fantastic, I truly think that this is top-notch. Still to this day, Banjo-Kazooie is like absolutely amazing. And although they kind of ditched Donkey Kong, obviously had to do the same thing, and they put this out, this is also really, really good. These are just solid games. And I also need to add the environments and the sort of just the music of Banjo-Kazooie are so good, so good. I have so many memories with Banjo-Kazooie, just over and over. The amount of hours that went into both these games, and I believe I did own both of these, because they were just that damn good. But these, just, wow, these are really good games, and they're still good today. Banjo-Kazooie is really good. And I have to say, as much as the Rare replay on the Xbox One is really cool, I feel like it's just better to play this on the N64. Set up the N64, play it. It's still a really good game, and I sort of don't have anything negative to say about these two because they're just so good. The next two games I don't have anymore that I wanted to talk about. And of course, there's tons of games to talk about, but these two in particular I have to talk about. But like I said, I sold my N64, and because I have them on other platforms now, I didn't bother to rebuy them on the N64. Maybe one day. So first up, let's talk about Super Mario 64. I have it on the DS now, and I just didn't bother to rebuy it on the N64. But Classic game. This is the epitome of the N64. This is great on so many levels. The music is like beyond awesome. The level design is great. It's overall just a fantastic game. I prefer side-scrolling platformers the most, and I'm glad that they've gone back to that. That they've kept both. Like Nintendo makes both styles of platformers now, whether as the N64 came out and they had the ability to do this style of game like Donkey Kong and Banjo-Kazooie, so they ditched the side-scrolling. And at the time as a kid, you just did not care. You thought that was the best thing ever. But now as an adult, I'm really glad they do both, because to me, side-scrolling has nothing to do with graphics. It's an actual style, like a subgenre within platforming, so I'm glad they didn't ditch it completely. But this game, though, it's really good. This, it's funny. I look back and some of these games look terrible, but this game really does hold up. Super Mario 64 is really, really good. So I encourage everyone, if you've not played this, to check it out. I don't know how that's possible, but it is really good. I don't have anything bad to say about it, but these games were all similar in the sense that you collected things. I think Banjo-Kazooie was puzzle pieces, it was stars in this game. You had to get to like 100. So you'd go to various levels, and here you'd jump into the painting, and so you'd go into something, and then each level would maybe have a certain amount of stars to collect, and then you'd go on, and then certain paintings you'd have to have so many stars to enter them, so it encouraged you to get more stars. They were just little teeny things you had to do in each level, and they were just so fun, and just talking about it has made me really want to turn the N64 on, because I've been playing a lot of Super Nintendo lately, but I shouldn't, completely ignore the N64 because it is really good. So the last game I want to talk about for Nintendo 64 is one I don't have anymore, but I do have it on the 3DS, because like I said, I sold it back when I sold my original Nintendo 64. So that game is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and this one I saved for last just because when I think of the N64, I think of Diddy Kong Racing, I think of GoldenEye or Pokemon Snap or whatever, Pokemon Stadium, which I haven't really mentioned. But wow, I think about Ocarina of Time. Back then I called it Ocarina of Time because I didn't know how to pronounce it. Wow, it's an incredible game, I have to say. It was my very first Zelda experience because I didn't play Link to the Past on the Super Nintendo. It was just a game that was never rented, or friends didn't have it or whatever, so it just didn't know. And I think back then everything was word of mouth. You didn't, it wasn't as obvious now because of, everything being so in your face. And as an adult, everything is in my face. I go to the store, I see it. But when you're a kid, it's not the same, especially when there was no YouTube or anything, or the same kind of advertising. So it was really just me going to Blockbuster with my dad or whoever and renting stuff. And I never rented that. So, but I did rent Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and I eventually owned it. And I just have so many memories. The music, the exploration aspect. I loved this game so much that I would print stuff off on the computer of like comics, or I would write up almost like a guide, like my own guide. Like, here's my guide to the Zoras. Here's my guide to Kokiri Village or whatever. I just got so into it, and I'd want to share it with everyone. I just loved it so much. Just an incredible game. I don't really have a lot to say. I mean, I admit that Zelda is very tedious, and I think after playing A Link Between Worlds that I kind of prefer that style better. So I really do need to, play Link to the Past. But it doesn't matter, because as much as some of this style, the 3D-esque style Zeldas kind of make me angry now, I just loved it as a kid. It was all I did. All me and my best friend would do was play it and, see where we are, or help each other play fight bosses or whatever. I just have so many memories with this game. So it kind of defines the Nintendo 64 for me. So it is an incredible game, as much as it may be tedious. This is really great. A great revelation for video games, just overall. Just a fantastic game. So those are my memories with the Nintendo 64. It is still a wonderful console. Lots of really great games. It was not a great system for role-playing games, which is why the PlayStation 1 beats it that way. But I never had a PlayStation 1, and I didn't really care. I was still, really into the platformers like Banjo-Kazooie and stuff, so I had a lot of fun with it and rented so many N64 games, like just so a lot of garbage. But it was a great console. Looks-wise, it tried to look a little futuristic, and I think it doesn't hold up the same. I really do prefer the older, like the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo, to the N64, but it was pretty neat in the sense that we actually got a joystick now. I remember that being a huge deal. I would, compared to the Super Nintendo controller, it was like, wow, this is really cool. So overall, it was a great console. I still use it today. It still works just fine. And there's just a lot of memories. I know that my generation tends, I think, to I guess, favor the N64 over the Super Nintendo. Because I feel like everyone my age, it's all about the N64. The Super Nintendo it's there, but I feel like more people had the N64. It was more memory-inducing for people. There's more nostalgia. For me, the Super Nintendo will always be number one, but the N64 is fantastic, and it's not hard to believe that it's 20 years old. So, I don't know, that's kind of crazy, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, 1996 wasn't exactly yesterday. So, I don't know, it's crazy. 20 years and 25 years for the Super Nintendo this year. So, crazy stuff. So, anyway, guys, what are your memories with the N64? What do you like about the N64? Just what about the N64, do you have to say about it? What do you like? What do you not like? Let me know in the comments. Click like, subscribe to my channel, please, and I'll see you guys later.